Nobody expected the final day of Team USA camp to end in silence. No arguments. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation caught on camera. Just a quiet moment that left the entire gym frozen, unsure of what to say next. Because what happened wasn't emotional. It was structural. Something shifted so fast, so completely, that by the time anyone tried to process it, the decision had already been made. This wasn't about who scored the most points. It wasn't about effort, hustle, or even personality. It was about control. And on that final day, one player took it without ever asking for permission. Caitlin Clark didn't just outperform expectations. She changed how the game worked inside that gym. And when the dust settled, someone else realized they no longer fit into the picture. But the scariest part? Everyone saw it happening, and nobody could stop it. And that's where the Real story begins. Team USA camp was never supposed to feel uncertain. From the moment the schedule was released, everyone involved believed this would be one of the easiest camps to manage in years. The structure was already there. The hierarchy felt obvious. The expectations were quietly agreed upon before the first ball ever touched the floor. This wasn't a proving ground. It was a confirmation process. Most of the players arrived knowing exactly where they were expected to fit. Some were there to lead. Some were there to support. Others were there to show growth, but not to disrupt the balance. That's how these camps usually work. Stability is valued more than experimentation, and familiarity often outweighs raw momentum. Coaches trust what they've already seen. They trust systems that don't require explaining. And Team USA, more than any other program, has always operated on the belief that cohesion matters more than individual brilliance. The goal isn't to showcase stars. It's to assemble a machine that runs smoothly under pressure. That mindset shaped everything before camp even began. Lineups were imagined in advance. Rotations were loosely sketched out. Even practice groupings reflected quiet expectations. Nobody said it out loud, but certain roles felt locked. And once roles feel locked, players behave differently. Some arrive relaxed. Others arrive anxious. Very few arrive believing they can change the entire equation. That's what made this camp dangerous. Because when everyone believes the picture is already complete, they stop watching for what doesn't fit inside the frame. The environment itself reinforced that illusion. The gym felt familiar. The drills were familiar. The tempo was controlled, almost clinical. There was an unspoken understanding that this was about refinement, not discovery. About execution, not reinvention. And for the first few moments, it looked exactly like that. Players moved through warm-ups without urgency. Conversations stayed light. The energy wasn't tense. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. The kind of comfort that only exists when people believe the outcome is already decided. But comfort has a weakness. It assumes nothing will challenge it. That's where the assumptions began to crack. Not with a confrontation. Not with a headline moment. Just a subtle disruption in rhythm. A slight change in how drills flowed. A quiet adjustment in where players instinctively moved when the ball swung from one side of the floor to the other. At first, nobody questioned it. Why would they? Everything looked normal. The same coaches. The same expectations. The same process that had worked for years. But beneath the surface, something was misaligned. The system was operating as if one variable had changed, even though no one had acknowledged it yet. That's the dangerous part of assumption-based environments. They don't collapse loudly. They drift. And when they drift, players who rely on structure feel it first. Because structure protects predictability. It rewards familiarity. It favors players who fit neatly into predefined roles. But when something new enters that doesn't need protection, the structure starts to bend. Not break. Bend. That bending creates uncertainty. And uncertainty at this level is terrifying. Some players felt it as hesitation. Others felt it as frustration. A few didn't feel it at all. They adapted instantly, without thinking. Those were the players who understood what was coming before it arrived. But most didn't. They were still operating under the belief that this camp was about confirming what everyone already knew. That their status carried weight. That effort alone would be enough to maintain position. That the system would protect them the way it always had. They didn't realize yet that the system was already adjusting. And once a system starts adjusting, it doesn't stop for emotions, reputations, or expectations. It responds to what works. And what was about to work didn't fit the old assumptions at all. Caitlin Clark didn't enter Team USA camp like someone trying to prove a point. There was no pause at the doorway, no scanning the gym, no visible shift in body language meant to announce her presence. She stepped onto the floor the same way she always did, as if the environment needed to adjust to her rhythm, not the other way around. At first, nothing seemed different. Drills continued. Whistles blew. Coaches called out instructions. The ball moved from hand to hand the way it always had. But beneath that surface-level normalcy, something began to pull. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change how the floor felt. Caitlin didn't demand touches. She didn't wave teammates toward her. She didn't slow the game down to establish control. Instead, she let the ball come to her naturally, and when it did, she made decisions so quickly that defenders were forced to react before they understood what had happened. That's where the gravity formed. Teammates adjusted their spacing without being told. Cuts came earlier. Screens were set at sharper angles. Passes arrived half a second sooner than expected, which meant players had to be ready or be exposed. The margin for error shrank immediately, and no one announced that change. The game simply required it. Coaches noticed the shift before they fully understood it. When Caitlin ran a drill, the chaos disappeared. Not because the drill became easier, but because it became cleaner. Mistakes stood out. Hesitation became visible. And players who thrived in broken plays suddenly looked uncomfortable. That's when attention started following her. Not in a celebrity way. In a basketball way. Every possession felt heavier. Not slower, heavier. Like each decision mattered more. Like the game itself had raised the standard without asking permission. Players leaned forward when she touched the ball. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the background noise of the gym softened. This wasn't hype. It was recognition. Caitlin saw angles others didn't even consider yet. She delivered passes to spots players hadn't fully committed to reaching. And when they missed opportunities, it wasn't loud frustration that followed. It was quiet clarity. The kind that makes players replay the moment in their head because they knew the read was there. That's the kind of control that unsettles environments built on hierarchy. Because hierarchy expects leadership to be declared. This was leadership being assumed. The offense didn't wait for instruction. It reorganized itself around efficiency. And Caitlin became the reference point, not because she asked for it, but because the ball kept finding her at the moments that mattered most. Even defenders responded differently. They closed out harder. Rotations tightened. Help came earlier than usual. And still, the ball moved past them, slipping into space before pressure could arrive. That's when coaches stopped talking as much. They started watching, not evaluating effort, evaluating inevitability. The uncomfortable truth began to surface quietly. When Caitlin was involved, the game made sense. When she wasn't, it felt slightly off. Not broken, just inefficient, like something was missing. And once that feeling exists, it doesn't go away. It lingers. Some players leaned into it immediately. They trusted the flow. They adjusted their timing. They accepted the higher standard. For them, the shift felt empowering. Others felt exposed. Because Caitlin's style didn't leave room for hesitation. If you weren't ready, the ball moved on. If you didn't read the play early, the moment passed. And there was no reset button. The game kept going. That's the kind of pressure that doesn't show up on stat sheets. It shows up in body language. Players began checking in with coaches more often, seeking reassurance, asking questions they wouldn't normally ask. Not about drills, but about roles. That's when it became clear. This wasn't just another camp adjustment. This was the system responding to intelligence. And systems don't care about expectations. They care about what works. Caitlin never raised her voice, never forced her presence, never looked for validation. She simply played the game one step ahead of everyone else. And by doing that, she quietly rewrote the rhythm of the entire gym. But not everyone experienced that shift the same way. For some, it felt like opportunity. For others, it felt like the floor was moving without them. And the next realization would come even faster. Paige Buchers didn't need a conversation to understand what was happening. She felt it within the first few possessions. Not as a threat, not as a challenge, but as clarity. The kind that only players with a deep feel for the game recognize immediately. While others were still adjusting to the new rhythm, Paige had already synced to it. When Caitlin initiated the offense, Paige didn't overcall for the ball or force her presence into the play. She spaced correctly without hesitation. She cut when the window opened, not when it was obvious. She trusted the pass before it came. And when it did, it arrived exactly where it needed to be. That's not coincidence. That's shared language. The difference showed up instantly. The floor widened. Defenders hesitated just long enough for seams to appear. The ball moved faster, but nothing felt rushed. Possessions ended cleanly. No scrambling. No recovery plays. For coaches watching from the sideline, it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't two stars sharing the floor. This was a system stabilizing. Paige didn't try to outshine Caitlin. She didn't challenge her control. She didn't adjust her game to compete for dominance. Instead, she adjusted it to complement the flow already forming. That's what made the pairing dangerous. There was no ego negotiation happening on the court. No visible hierarchy battle. No need for one player to prove superiority over the other. The game decided that for them. Caitlin organized. Paige executed. And together they removed friction. That removal exposed something uncomfortable. When Paige wasn't on the floor with Caitlin, the game still functioned. But when they shared possessions, the difference was unmistakable. The offense didn't just work. It breathed. Paige understood what that meant. She knew how rare it was to play with someone who processed the game at that speed, who saw not just the open player, but the next reaction after the defense adjusted. That kind of understanding creates trust quickly, and trust accelerates everything. Coaches leaned forward. Assistants whispered, not about shot making, but about feel, about how natural it looked, about how little intervention it required. That's gold at this level, because the hardest thing to coach isn't effort. It's cohesion. Paige's willingness to adapt without resistance told the coaches something important. She wasn't there to protect a role. She was there to elevate the system. And systems reward players who enhance efficiency, not attention. While some players tried to impose themselves physically or emotionally, Paige did something far more effective. She disappeared into the game. Not in a passive way. In a precise way. The kind that makes defenses lose track of her just long enough for damage to be done. A cut here. A relocation there. Always on time. That's when the realization settled in for the staff. This wasn't going to be a debate. When Caitlin and Paige shared the floor, the decision-making load lightened. Reads became simpler. Turnovers dropped. The offense punished hesitation instantly. And hesitation, at this level, is unforgivable. Paige saw what others hadn't yet fully processed. This wasn't about talent stacking. It was about control hierarchy. Caitlin wasn't competing for space. She was creating it. And Paige thrived inside that creation. There was no resentment. No tension. No awkward adjustment period. Just alignment. And alignment at this level is louder than dominance. That's why the shift became irreversible so quickly. Once coaches see a combination that doesn't need managing, they stop experimenting. They stop forcing balance. They stop protecting feelings. They start building. Paige didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. Her body language said enough. Calm. Focused. Confident. Not rushed. Not frustrated. She had found her place. And by doing so, she unintentionally highlighted who hadn't. Because when a system locks into rhythm, anything that disrupts it becomes impossible to ignore. And for one player watching this unfold, that realization was just beginning to sting. Angel Reese didn't arrive at Team USA camp uncertain. She came in prepared, conditioned, and confident in what she brought to the floor. She had earned her reputation through physical presence, relentless effort, and an ability to impose herself on games that turned chaotic. In most environments, that kind of intensity becomes a stabilizing force. This environment was different. At first, nothing felt wrong. She ran the same drills, took the same reps, battled in the same spaces. Her effort never dipped. Her voice was present. On the surface, she looked exactly like she belonged. But something subtle began to change. The ball didn't come back the way it usually did. Not because teammates avoided her. Not because coaches instructed otherwise. It just didn't cycle through her hands as often. Reads shifted. The offense flowed through angles that bypassed her natural strengths. And that's when confusion crept in. Angel tried to assert herself the way she always had. She increased physicality, set harder screens, crashed the glass with more urgency, initiated contact earlier in possessions. These are the things that usually bend a game toward her will. This time, the game didn't bend. It sped up. The tempo became unforgiving. Decisions were being made before she could establish position. Passes arrived early, sometimes too early, forcing her to react instead of dictate. When she hesitated for even a moment, the ball moved on. That's when effort stopped being enough. Angel wasn't being outworked. She was being outpaced. And that distinction matters. Because when effort fails, you adjust. When pace leaves you behind, you question yourself. She could feel it in the huddles. The focal points were changing. The language shifted from emphasis on force to emphasis on flow. Coaches talked about spacing, timing, and anticipation more than matchups or physical advantages. That wasn't her game. At least, not the version that had brought her here. Angel wasn't frustrated yet. She was searching, trying to find where she fit inside a structure that no longer paused for dominance. She watched possessions unfold where her presence didn't alter the outcome. That's when the invisible wall appeared. She was still on the floor, still involved, still competing. But the game was happening somewhere else. This is the hardest moment for any elite athlete. When you're not rejected outright, but gradually removed from the center without explanation. There's no argument to fight, no coach to confront, no clear reason to point to, just absence. Angel could feel eyes shifting away from her. Not dismissively, strategically. Coaches weren't ignoring her. They were recalibrating, watching what worked, tracking what didn't disrupt the flow. And disruption had become unacceptable. She tried to reinsert herself emotionally. More intensity, sharper reactions, louder presence. But the gym didn't respond, because the environment had moved past emotion. It wanted efficiency, and efficiency doesn't respond to force. That realization lands heavy. It doesn't explode. It sinks. Every missed connection adds weight. Every possession without impact reinforces the same thought. Where do I fit now? Angel had always thrived in moments where effort and presence changed momentum. Here, momentum no longer needed changing. It was already aligned. And alignment doesn't compromise. She wasn't failing. She wasn't being punished. She was being outgrown by the system in real time. That's the truth that hurts the most. Because there's no one to blame. As the days progressed, the gap became harder to ignore. Not in minutes played, but in influence. The ball found others in critical moments. Adjustments were made around different skill sets. And Angel could feel her role shrinking without ever being officially redefined. That uncertainty drains energy. Confidence becomes effort. Effort becomes frustration. And frustration becomes visible, no matter how much you try to hide it. By the time the scrimmage approached, Angel already sensed what was coming. Not the outcome, the clarity. Because once the game removes doubt, it leaves no room for interpretation. And the scrimmage would do exactly that. There were no cameras for the scrimmage. No crowd. No outside noise to distort what happened next. Just players, coaches, and the raw truth of the game stripped of context and narrative protection. This was where everything became clear. Scrimmages at this level are never casual. They're not about energy or experimentation. They're about translation. Can what you bring survive when structure disappears and pride takes over? From the opening possession, the answer was obvious. Caitlin Clark ran point. Not loudly. Not theatrically. She didn't call attention to herself or direct traffic with exaggerated gestures. She simply initiated the offense, and the game organized itself around her presence. Paige spaced the floor instinctively. Cuts came at the exact moment help defenders leaned. Screens were set with purpose, not force. The ball didn't stick. It didn't bounce. It moved. Angel felt it immediately. The pace was different now. Not camp pace. Not drill pace. Real pace. The kind that punishes hesitation before it's even visible. She tried to establish herself early. Took space. Fought for position. Demanded physical respect. But the ball didn't wait. Passes arrived early to shooters. Kickouts came before defenders collapsed. Entry angles shifted before she could seal. The offense wasn't avoiding her. It simply didn't need to pause long enough for her strengths to matter. That's when pressure crept in. Angel pushed harder. More contact. More force. She tried to disrupt rhythm, to break timing, to impose her will physically. In other environments, that would have slowed the game down. Here it didn't. The offense absorbed the contact and kept moving. Caitlin never rushed. Even when pressure increased, her decisions stayed one step ahead. She didn't react to defenders. She predicted them. And every correct read widened the gap between those who could keep up and those who couldn't. Possession by possession, the contrast sharpened. One side played with anticipation. The other played with urgency. Urgency feels active, but it's reactive at its core. and reactive basketball is always late. Angel wasn't losing matchups. She wasn't getting dominated individually. What was happening was worse. She was becoming irrelevant to the outcome of the possession. That realization lands like a weight. You don't feel it in one moment. It builds. A missed read here. A late rotation there. A possession where the ball never comes your way. Another where it does, but the window has already closed. Each moment confirms the same truth. The game doesn't need you to function. That's the cruel clarity of elite basketball. Coaches saw it, not with judgment, but with inevitability. Assistants stopped tracking effort and started tracking flow. Who elevated the system? Who slowed it? Who disappeared when the game demanded precision? Those answers write themselves. Angel could feel the room shifting. Not against her, away from her. Attention followed the ball, and the ball followed efficiency. This wasn't about toughness. It wasn't about desire. It was about processing speed. And processing speed doesn't respond to emotion. By the midpoint of the scrimmage, something irreversible had happened. The decision-makers didn't need stats. They didn't need film. They had seen enough. The hierarchy had revealed itself. Caitlin wasn't auditioning anymore. She was commanding. Paige wasn't adjusting. She was stabilizing. And Angel was fighting a battle the game itself had already ended. That's when realization replaced frustration. You could see it in her movement. Slightly slower reactions. Less decisive cuts. The weight of understanding settling in. Not anger. Not defeat. Acceptance. The scrimmage ended without celebration. No one needed to say anything. Everyone in the gym understood exactly what had been exposed. This wasn't competition anymore. It was clarity. And clarity, once achieved, doesn't reverse. The only question left was how each player would respond to it. And for Angel, that answer would come sooner than anyone expected. The scrimmage didn't end the competition. It revealed that the competition had already ended. That distinction matters. Because in elite environments, there's a difference between losing a battle and realizing the war was decided before you knew you were fighting it. Angel Reese felt that shift almost immediately after the scrimmage ended. Not through words. Not through confrontation. Through silence. The gym didn't buzz the way it usually did after intense runs. There were no animated breakdowns. No urgent corrections shouted across the floor. Instead, there was a quiet efficiency to the reset. Players returned to drills with purpose, not curiosity. That's when Angel knew. This wasn't evaluation anymore. This was confirmation. Coaches didn't need to discuss adjustments out loud. Assistants didn't scramble for notes. Everything had already aligned internally. The system had revealed its preference, and now the job was to refine it, not question it. Angel could feel the difference in how she was addressed. Not colder, just less central. Instructions became general. Feedback shortened. The game didn't orbit around her perspective anymore. That's when frustration stopped being loud and started being heavy. This wasn't about playing time. It wasn't about effort. It wasn't about toughness. It was about usefulness. And usefulness at this level is brutal. Angel had always competed with force, with presence, with the belief that if she imposed herself hard enough, the game would respond. But hierarchy doesn't respond to force. It responds to compatibility. And compatibility had already been decided. She tried to reset mentally, told herself this was temporary, that another rep could change perception, that another sequence could swing momentum back in her favor. But the game had already moved on. Caitlin controlled tempo effortlessly now, not just initiating offense, but managing energy, knowing when to push, when to pull back, when to let others shine. Coaches watched her the way you watch a stabilizer, not a spark. Paige remained perfectly synced, always in the right place, never forcing the moment, playing like someone who understood exactly where she fit and why that mattered. Angel watched all of it unfold from inside the floor. That's the cruelest position to be in. You're not excluded. You're present. And yet you're peripheral. No one blamed her. No one confronted her. There was no moment where someone said, "This isn't working." Because the system doesn't need to announce those decisions. It demonstrates them. And demonstration leaves no room for argument. The more Angel tried to reinsert herself, the more obvious the misalignment became. Not because she lacked ability, but because the game no longer slowed down to accommodate her style. That realization doesn't explode. It drains. Energy turns inward. Confidence becomes calculation. Every decision feels heavier because you know the margin for error is gone. And once you know that, you play tighter, more cautious, less free. That's when hierarchy fully replaces competition. Competition implies possibility. Hierarchy implies finality. Angel could sense that finality in the smallest details, where she stood in line for drills, who coaches spoke to first, where eyes went during breakdowns. These things don't need explanation. They communicate everything. This wasn't a rejection of her talent. It was an acceptance of a different direction. And acceptance hurts more because it doesn't give you something to fight against. By the time the final day approached, Angel wasn't angry. She wasn't explosive. She was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally, carrying the weight of understanding that the system had already chosen what it needed. The worst part, she understood why. That's what made it unbearable. Because when you understand the logic, you lose the ability to argue with it. And once hierarchy is established, the only decision left isn't how to compete. It's how to respond. And that response would define the next chapter. The final day of Team USA camp didn't feel tense. That was the unsettling part. There was no nervous energy in the air, no forced intensity, no sense of urgency hanging over the floor. Instead, the gym felt calm, controlled, almost sterile. That's how Angel knew it was over. When a competition is still alive, the room buzzes. Players talk more. Coaches push harder. Everyone tries to squeeze something extra out of the moment. But this wasn't that kind of morning. This felt like execution day. The drills started on time. Movements were sharp. Instructions were minimal. Nobody needed reminders. The structure had already settled, and now it was being reinforced. Caitlin Clark stepped into that environment like she belonged there permanently. Not as a guest. Not as a newcomer. As someone the system trusted completely. She didn't rush. She didn't overcommunicate. She simply played within the rhythm that had already been built around her. And the rhythm held. She controlled tempo with subtlety. A pause here. A quick push there. Calling actions without calling attention to herself. The ball moved exactly where it needed to go, exactly when it needed to get there. Coaches didn't interrupt her flow. They let it breathe. Paige Buchers remained perfectly aligned. Always available. Always on time. Her presence didn't disrupt anything. It reinforced it. She played like someone who knew her role wasn't being evaluated anymore. It was being relied on. Angel Reese was still on the floor. Still running. Still competing. But the difference between being involved and being central had never felt larger. The ball rarely came her way. Not because teammates ignored her, but because the offense no longer paused long enough for her to assert herself. By the time she established position, the decision had already been made somewhere else. That's when reality fully settled in. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't situational. This was structural. Angel tried to stay locked in, focused on details, defensive positioning, hustle plays, the things that had always earned her respect. But even those moments felt quieter now, less impactful. The system didn't need saving. It didn't need energy. It needed consistency. And consistency had already chosen its leaders. Every possession reinforced the same truth. Caitlin dictated outcomes without forcing them. Paige complemented without competing. And Angel existed on the edges of a game that no longer revolved around her strengths. That's when fatigue turned emotional. Not frustration. Not anger. Resignation. Angel watched how coaches interacted with Caitlin. Short conversations. Trust-filled exchanges. No over-explaining. No micromanaging. The kind of communication reserved for players who have already earned control. She noticed how Paige received feedback. Specific. Tactical. Future-focused. Not corrective. And she noticed what she didn't receive. Not criticism. Not guidance. Just distance. Distance is louder than words. As the session went on, Angel's movements became more deliberate. Less instinctive. You could feel the weight of every decision she made. Because once you know you're no longer shaping the outcome, every action becomes a question. Do I force this? Do I wait? Does this even matter? Those questions drain confidence faster than any missed shot. By the time the final whistle blew, nothing dramatic had happened. No argument. No confrontation. No visible breaking point. And that's what made it final. The decision had already been absorbed by the room. Angel didn't look around for validation. She didn't search faces for reassurance. She already knew what she would find. Acceptance. Not agreement. Acceptance. Because everyone had felt the same thing. This wasn't a failure. It was a conclusion. And once conclusions are reached at this level, they don't reopen. The only thing left was the response. And Angel was already preparing for hers. There was no signal that it was about to happen. No raised voice. No visible frustration. No dramatic pause meant to draw attention. Angel Reese didn't storm off the floor. She didn't make eye contact with anyone on the way out. She didn't wait for a meeting, an explanation, or permission. She simply stepped away. And that's what froze the gym. Because in environments like this, exits are usually managed, timed, explained. Even emotional ones come with context. This didn't. It happened in the quiet space between drills, when nothing was supposed to happen at all. One moment she was there. The next she wasn't. At first, people didn't react. Not because they didn't notice, but because they were trying to understand what they were seeing. Coaches paused mid-conversation. Players stopped moving. Assistants glanced around, unsure whether to say something or let the moment pass. No one filled the silence. That silence said everything. Angel didn't slam a door. She didn't announce her frustration. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already understood what that decision meant. It wasn't anger driving it. It was clarity. This wasn't quitting in the emotional sense. It was opting out of a reality that had already been decided. When a player leaves loudly, there's something to debate. When a player leaves quietly, there's nothing left to argue. The game had spoken. The hierarchy was set. And Angel chose not to linger inside a structure where her influence had already been reduced. Coaches exchanged brief looks. Not shocked. Not angry. Just aware. They had seen this before in different forms. Not this player. Not this moment. But this pattern. When elite competitors realize a system no longer needs them, they don't always fight it. Sometimes they walk away from it. Players avoided eye contact, not out of judgment, but respect. They understood the weight of that choice. Leaving without spectacle takes more certainty than leaving in anger. Angel didn't look back. That detail mattered, because looking back implies doubt. And there was no doubt left. The practice didn't stop. It couldn't. The system had already moved forward. And as harsh as it sounds, that's the nature of elite basketball. The game doesn't pause for realizations. It continues. Caitlin Clark stayed exactly where she was. No reaction. No acknowledgement. No shift in demeanor. Not because she didn't notice, but because she didn't need to respond. Her role in this moment wasn't emotional. It was structural. The offense still flowed. The rhythm held. The direction remained unchanged. That contrast was impossible to ignore. One player exited quietly, having accepted the truth. Another remained, having become the truth. The gym slowly returned to motion. Conversations resumed. Drills continued. But something fundamental had been sealed. This wasn't a temporary separation. It wasn't a cooling-off moment. It was a line being crossed. Angel's walkout didn't disrupt the system. It confirmed it. And once confirmation replaces uncertainty, there's no going back. What followed wouldn't be about reaction or blame. It would be about interpretation. About how the league, the media, and decision-makers would reframe what had just happened. Because moments like this don't stay contained. They ripple outward. And the aftermath would expose far more than the walkout itself ever could. The moment Angel Reese left the gym, nothing exploded publicly. That's what made it dangerous. There were no immediate statements. No emergency meetings. No visible fallout for cameras to capture. On the surface, everything looked contained. But internally, the damage was already done. Because what happened wasn't just a player stepping away. It was a system revealing what it valued when pressure removed all pretenses. And once that truth is exposed, everyone connected to it feels the need to respond, even if they don't say anything right away. Inside the gym, the staff didn't scramble. That was the first sign. There was no panic, no sudden attempt to rebalance energy, no visible effort to smooth things over. The practice continued with the same pace, the same structure, the same focal points. That told its own story. Caitlin Clark remained at the center of the action. Not symbolically, functionally. The offense still flowed through her. The decision-making still originated with her. And the system didn't show even a slight tremor from Angel's absence. That was the exposure. Because if losing a high-profile player doesn't disrupt the system, it means the system was never built around them to begin with. Coaches knew what that looked like from the outside. They understood the optics. They also understood that pretending otherwise would only delay the inevitable. The game had already answered the question they'd been circling for months. Who controls the floor when nothing else matters? The answer was no longer debatable. Within hours, the tone around Caitlin began to shift. Quietly at first. Conversations changed. Language softened. The same people who once framed her as a challenge began reframing her as a solution. Not because opinions changed overnight, but because reality demanded adjustment. Dominance has a way of doing that. It doesn't argue. It forces alignment. Highlights began circulating. Not flashy ones. Clean ones. Reads. Passes. Pace control. The things casual viewers don't always notice, but coaches obsess over. The narrative didn't flip dramatically. It recalibrated. From question mark to cornerstone. That transition matters. Because when organizations change how they talk about a player, it signals long-term intent. And Team USA's internal shift was already happening in real time. Angel's departure forced the issue into the open. It made everyone acknowledge what had already been decided behind closed doors. There was no longer room for balancing acts or symbolic gestures. The system had chosen clarity over compromise. And clarity is unforgiving. Paige Bucher's role became even more defined in the aftermath. Not louder, not more prominent, just more essential. She fit perfectly into the structure Caitlin controlled. Her adaptability made the system stronger, not more complicated. That contrast stood out. One player aligned. One player stabilized. One player stepped away. Not because of conflict, because of incompatibility. The league felt it too. You could sense it in the way conversations shifted. In the way coverage softened its skepticism. In the way people stopped asking if Caitlin belonged and started asking how everything would change around her. That's when the realization spread beyond the gym. This wasn't a camp storyline anymore. It was a directional shift. The walkout wasn't the headline. It was the proof. Proof that the old hierarchy couldn't coexist with the new one. Proof that certain styles of dominance no longer dictated outcomes at the highest level. And most importantly, proof that Caitlin Clark could no longer be managed, delayed, or framed as a future option. She was the present. The system didn't just reveal itself that day. It committed. And once commitment replaces experimentation, there's no going back to what was comfortable before. The only thing left was how Caitlin would respond to that power. She still hadn't said a word. And that silence was about to become the loudest statement of all. Caitlin never celebrated. Never addressed the tension. Never explained herself. Her game already had. She proved something without saying a sentence. You can delay her. You can doubt her. But once the game starts, she dictates terms. And that's what scares people the most. As camp ended, Caitlin walked out the same way she arrived. Calm. Focused. Unbothered. Everyone else recalibrated. Power had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. This wasn't drama. It was evolution. Caitlin became unavoidable. Angel reached a crossroads. Paige solidified her role. And Team USA learned that the future doesn't ask for permission. It arrives. Caitlin Clark never chased this moment. She didn't campaign for it. She didn't demand attention or force her way into the conversation. She simply kept playing the game the way she always had, trusting that when the pressure arrived, the truth would surface on its own. And it did. Inside that gym, there were no speeches, no explanations, no dramatic declarations. Just a system that revealed what it needed when everything else was stripped away. When the game sped up. When comfort disappeared. When reputation stopped mattering. That's when Caitlin didn't rise to the moment. The moment rose to her. While others fought for relevance, she controlled direction. While others reacted emotionally, she responded structurally. And without saying a single word, she changed how Team USA sees the future of its program. This wasn't about drama. It wasn't about winners and losers. It was about evolution. Because at the highest level, basketball doesn't reward noise. It rewards clarity. And when clarity arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. It replaces everything. What happened at camp wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a shift that's still unfolding. And the people who understand that early are the ones who see what's coming next. So if you want to stay ahead of the narratives before they hit the headlines, if you want the real stories behind the moments that quietly change the game, make sure you're subscribed. Because when the next moment finds her, and it will, you'll want to be here when it happens.